right. Welcome everyone to the February meeting of Healthy Pine River. Thanks so much for coming out and sharing your Thursday night with us. We always really appreciate it. Tonight, I think we have something really interesting for you. And that is, well, so let's back up a little bit. I've been involved with Pine River stuff for not as long as many of the people in this room, but still for a decently long time, 5-6 years. There are a couple of questions that I have had for those 5 or 6 years that will be answered tonight because we have the information now. As part of this dam risk reduction study, we now know things that will shape what the future of the Pine River looks like. So I'm really excited about that tonight, and I'm really excited to see all of you. But before we get to things, a couple of pieces of business. Can I get a motion to approve the meeting minutes from January 8th?
Make a motion.
Yeah. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? I should have said discussion. I apologize. That was a bad parliamentary move on my part.
Oh, excuse me.
Yes.
As far as discussion, like I read the newsletter, so I mean you can approve the notes. That's
Yeah.
But like a lot of the statements that were in the newsletter are not accurate in my opinion. I've lived on the river for 35 years above the dam, and I disagree with entirely in this one paragraph where it says the impact of the ongoing degradation is significant. Greatly reduced water recreation and human health issues. So I've been there 36 years this spring. I've never seen more people use the river than this year. It's been incredible. So the activity, the fishing, people in kayaking, a lot of people this year. So it says rendered city property honoring your river as unstillable. That's because anybody that lives in Alma, and please don't take this the wrong way, but Mechanic Street is not, you're trying to have a valuable piece of property that is on Mechanic Street, given some of the housing that's along the road there, maybe would not be inclined to put up an expensive development. And I'm just stating facts, right? If you look at the real estate market, it's not the river, it's the location of the property that the city has that is rendering it way less value. And then 3, it says that it has negatively impacted home and property values with residents living on the river. That's totally false. My neighbor sold his house this summer for a number that I thought was unapproachable. And I will tell you that my property is continuing to significantly increase with housing inflation. And the fact is, it's on the water. Like my wife and I went to cottage in Crystal Lake. And if Crystal Lake, it's a spring-fed lake, if the springs were to go out at Crystal Lake, a bunch of cattails and junk bush and trees grew up, I mean, I can tell you, I can pretty comfortably sell my cottage for $850,000 and $900,000 quickly. And if that lake dried up and it went like Sanford did, $150,000 maybe, if my property is worth. And so my concern is, everybody that lives along the river, if the dam goes out, and I got a picture that I'll circulate, they're like, the views that we have on the river are absolutely spectacular because it's a huge, long panoramic view. But if the dam goes out, all that's going to happen is a bunch of cattails and junk stuff's going to grow up. Within 2 years, we won't be able to see the river. Within 10 years, we won't be able to see beyond the edge of our property line because of the growth of junk and trees and everything else. So when the dam went out in Stanford, property values went down by as much as 80%. But at least they're building a dam to bring a lake back. So that's a temporary thing. You take the dam out in Alma, I know the state's concerned about paying $6,000 a year for dam inspection fees. Well, I can guarantee you everybody along the river is going to file a lawsuit and a complaint and go to state tax tribunal. And the city of Alma is going to lose significant amounts of property taxes because we'll win. There's no doubt that property values have been up 30-40%. So, because water is water. At the end of the day, it may not be the perfect body of water, but look at the picture. It's spectacular. So, I think these all, I don't know who wrote it, but I would disagree with every point. I just want to make that note.
That's fair. And I think that, I'm just going to quickly respond. So, a couple of things. things. I'm actually kind of interested in this conversation about the amount of recreational use. I think that's something that needs more study. This is certainly the impression of a lot of people, that actually there has been a decline over time. This is something I've heard from quite a few people. But, given that we don't actually have a fully systematic study of it, fair, reasonable point, in the broader sense, I would tend to say a couple of things. One is that no one is planning on taking out the dam right now. This is to understand what should be done. And that's really where we're at. So that's useful feedback, right? To help us to better understand what we actually should be doing with it. I will say that everything that I've been seeing tends to suggest that it is not so simple as taking out a dam or leaving one in. That there's actually quite a few options, many of which preserve coastlines or may not, right? So these are all things that we have to consider. But then the final thing I would say is that, and this is something I see Eric out there, so I can't call on him, but there is a broad sense that in terms of property values, that there is a depression that takes place. Now, that doesn't mean that your property isn't very valuable, right? That doesn't mean that your neighbor's isn't very valuable, right? The question is it being depressed versus what it might be in a natural market? And we are still kind of studying that right now. That is one of the things that we hope to get out of this, right? To better understand whether or not that is true. However, some preliminary evidence, which actually we'll hear about in a moment, does tend to suggest that at least local realtors strongly feel like this is an issue. So anyway, that.
But I can guarantee you, if the dam were to go out, our property values would go down.
If it's done very badly, I totally agree with you. And that is the question, right? Can it be done well, and what does that look like, right? And that's basically what's being studied right now. Because really, this is very much in the decision-making process, right? So I appreciate that. I appreciate the feedback. All right. Any other comments? Okay. So just very quickly moving on to the financial report. We have it down there at the bottom. If anyone has any questions, our treasurer is here as well. Perfect. Well, then I will go straight to the program then. So, like I said, there are a couple of questions that I have had about what was going on in the river. And one of the questions that I really had was about sediment. What is actually there? We have some answers there too. And also, how quickly is the river disappearing if nothing is done? And good friend Garnett from Tritera is going to give us some degree of clarity on it.
I can go first here. So Tritera was hired as part of the feasibility analysis, the grant that was got by Healthy Pine River. And what we were hired to do was to repeat the sediment survey that BAR did back in 2016, which was essentially, they picked 12 spots in the river, they did transects, and they measured the thickness both from the top of the sediment to where they called it the hard pan, essentially where they got refusal, and then also the depth of water, right? And so we went back out and we did both that to check sediment, and then we also took 5 composite samples of soil, sediment, we'll say sediment, when it's down in the water, sediment. And we had them analyzed just to get an idea of what impacts might be there. Obviously one of the feasibility analysis things we want to figure out is, well, what would it cost to just get the sediment out and restore it to the previous condition it was when the dam went in, right? A lake, per se. And so we have good news on the analysis side, right? That we ran those 5 composite samples for things you might expect along the river. Obviously, there's some contamination in the area. We weren't sure if we'd get petroleum products, different chlorinated solvents, things like that. And we also sampled for metals. And so from that analysis on all 5 samples, what we can say is the things that we detected are generally, we found metals in every location. You find metals in every location in Michigan. The naturally occurring. There was nothing in the sediment that said, holy cow, this is really contaminated sediment and it's going to add a ton of additional cost if the plan were to just remove it, okay? Or just say move it to the side of the river, right? There's lots of ideas there. So that was the good news. The bad news was so the transect started, you know where Honeywood Creek is, it's right along Bruce Road. If you're on Bruce Road, you go just south of where the bridge is. That's about where our first transect was. And then the last transect is right before the dam. Well, if you start at the dam and work your way back, the sediment kind of is less at the dam, right? It's close to what it was in 2016 near the dam as it is now. There's not a whole lot of change with the amount of sediment that's there. What we found, though, is if you go all the way to where the first transect was, there's about 5 feet more of sediment further upstream than there was originally. So you kind of would expect that, right? Like, as the water hits the sediment, it slows down, and that's where the sediment falls. And Honeywood Creek also kind of falls in there. So you've got two combining factors in here that are adding to the sediment that's in here. And so we take that information and essentially we calculate how much sediment we think is in it compared to what bar thought was there. And bar came up with about 420,000 cubic yards of sediment is what they thought was stacked up behind the dam in 2016. And it's around 700,000 cubic yards right now. And so that, if you average it out and say it was per year, is about 31,000 cubic yards of sediment that's kind of backing up behind the dam. And it sounds like a huge number, but rivers are flowing. There's it's not like it's crystal clear. It's turbidity. There's lots of things that carry sediment through the river. It's not surprising if there's that amount of sediment in a river flowing. It's just in this current location, it can't flow correctly. So it's backing off and it's falling further and further upstream. If you don't change anything under this scenario, what you end up with is eventually you get shallower and shallower water on the edges, and then the vegetation in that area will grow up, and then it dies, and it grows, and it dies. And if you don't fix it, you'll end up with a river channel that now is in its historical location with a dam, and everyone will no longer have the waterfront shoreline eventually. The good news would be that the last foot or two of that filling in is really slow. That takes the plant vegetation and things kind of doing. Instead of, if you get to Honeywood Creek, you've added 5 feet of sediment pretty quickly. That last little bit where the water column is, that's got to fill in with vegetation. So you've got good news on the sample results. Bad news is there's more and more sediment backing up in the river. Probably what I would say at least a pretty significant volume each year. If the plan is to dredge it, you're adding another 31,000 cubic yards a year to that dredging plan if you wanted to restore it to where it was. And so that's the stuff that GEI is looking at to say, how can we restore some flow here? Is there a way to get rid of the sediment? Obviously, that dam lasted for a very long time with the water the way that it was, right? They got 50, 75 years of use out of that little pond before they had to do some things. And if they had done a better job, maybe of the long-term maintenance, clearing things out year to year or whatever, then you wouldn't necessarily have this problem. But at this point, it's so far back from the dam, the channel's slowing down that you're getting a lot of dumping. I say dumping, like it sounds bad, like people are stopping it. It's not that the county is adding all the extra sediment or it's shocking that there's that volume in the water. It's just the way that it's set up in this location, it has nowhere to go. So those are kind of the conclusion or the information we gave to GEI. I don't think anybody's surprised that there's sediment there or that it's stacking up further upstream. That's what you would expect. The question really is, how long will it take before you end up with what is just a river channel? You won't have that water that you can look out over because it will eventually just kind of reclaim itself. It's going to go back to the riverbank that it was if something's not done. It's just what can we do? What is the feasibility of it? And I know everyone would rather have it be the lake that it was. I mean, when it was at its hottest, I'm sure Avalon, I've been told Avalon used to test pontoons out there all the time. There used to be a lot of boating and different recreational things. That stuff would be great. It would changes to the existing dam, and somehow you gotta get rid of the sediment that's left. Or we're just gonna have a river. Essentially. So, we didn't do a whole lot of other additional analysis on the sediment because, with water flowing through it like that, as you all probably know, it floods into water and flows downstream. So generally speaking, in rivers like this, the contamination isn't that predictable. I was at the company that did a similar sediment survey for the Grand River in downtown Grand Rapids, and found they had almost no contamination in the sediment behind the dam as they did. They were shocked. But it's because the water flows through that and just absorbs those contaminants and it's long gone. So the sediment itself generally isn't the issue. It's just, getting it out of the water and how do you maintain it going forward.
Any questions people have? This was the answer, one of the big answers that I mentioned before. There'd been a lot of conversation about, well, what is in the sediment? Is it an issue? Is there something we can do with the sediment potentially? That looks pretty promising. Of course.
The cost to handle the sediment is a lot lower, at least under these conditions, than you might expect in certain areas. There are, I'm sure, some urban areas where there's a lot more contamination readily being added to the sediment. We don't have as much of that as far as the issue and things go right on top of the pond, where it's consistent.
Could that be something, right?
What's that?
Could that be, if it was fenced out and piled, could that be secured for 2 or 3 years and reused?
Yeah, honestly, being in Gratiot County, I live down here somewhere. It's all sand at my house. I imagine it's probably some decent sand. And if you took it out with somebody's screen, there's people around here. They dug my pond to take the sand to screen it out to sell. So it's hard to believe. It certainly could sit there and it could be dried. What it's composed of, right? Probably mostly sand. So it's not that it's completely unusable, but it's in the water, and if you just take it out, it's 700,000 cubic yards. That's a large volume to just get out of there, right? And to store that, someone's got to give up their land for a while to store it, and then how do you manage from there? Those are all things that I'm sure GEI is trying to calculate as far as the feasibility goes. But that part of it is. And again, it's not to alarm people. I don't think it's that there's extra sediment in our river that's stacking up behind it. I think it's just the way that it's set up. That's normal amount of sediment in my tank. It's not going to be expect crystal clear waters with no sediment in there. That's kind of how it works. But in this case, it slows down so quickly it just drops.
And that's part of the design of the dam, right? Because of the way the dam is designed, yeah.
And with the shallower water upstream, I don't know how that will affect the shallow water. There's room for 5 feet of sediment by Honeywell Creek because it's deeper there. But as the river shallows out, I don't know how that slowing of the river will affect that area. Right?
I know we did the leakage of they had problems with settlement and growth, and they were supposed to draw that down, open up and let it draw down during the winter months, and they never did. And obviously the same thing here, if that would have done, they would have been able to remove some of this stuff.
Sure. Yeah. And it was designed at a time not for this, right? When they put that thing in, they needed to just create that mill pond to go out. It's old technology, and also just taking the dam out. We can't, even if you thought that it would wash the sediment away, well, there's another dam just downstream that's going to be a problem down there, right? And so we have to factor in what we're playing with, and even fish restoration, right? Like it doesn't even restore any migration unless you do something with the dam in St. Louis. So there's other factors that have to kind of add in to decide what's feasible, and honestly, what's feasible. It has a lot to do with how much things cost, right? So.
Is there any way to send it to the area and maybe go downstream slowly?
Yeah, but that gives you the same problems in St. Louis, right? Like if you putting more sediment over top of the river and saying, okay, well, hopefully it doesn't get caught up by their dam, right? And how that might look, I can't say how well that would work with the way do that with 31,000 cubic yards a year just to save.
Slowly, we take some time,
Right.
But I think the dams need to be redone.
That's, I'm sure, part of it, right, is if you find a way to make it so the water level stays the same. I know they have dams where they go underneath instead of over top, and different ways that they can design things. But again, those things all cost money, and so that's what they're trying to decide is the engineering wise. I have heard that they say that, the drop in the river isn't so bad, right? So it's not like, I don't think they could do something like that. But again, that's what DEI gets to do with the information we get. But if nothing is done, most likely it might take a few more decades to happen, but eventually that's going to turn back into a river. And the river bank, the shoreline is going to change, the river will get changed out. It'll be a swamp for a while first, it'll slowly reclaim itself. Nature has a way of pulling stuff off like that, right? It's just kind of, and that's just the same kind of thing, like if you try to create exactly the channel you want, you're still fighting the river channel. And eventually those things move on their own naturally, so you're restoring things to a certain way. It's true. So,
Any other questions anyone has? Thanks so much. Brings a lot of clarity to this. Thank you. All right, Dave Ringel was going to be here to talk about the State Street Dam status and liability. He is unfortunately detained, so Chuck is going to fill in.
It will be quick. Just a quick reminder, we wrote the grant and called it a feasibility study because we don't know what the best options are. Truth of the matter. We had a dam expert here probably 3-4 years ago that worked for the city, as well as some other folks that were involved in the meeting, and he said we could take the dam out, design the grade so that you might use 3 feet of frontage from the yard. Basically stay the same. That blew me away. Now that was his opinion. I have heard other people say, I'll lose my front yard, or I'll lose, 50 yards of property or whatever. That's why we're doing the feasibility study, to understand the hydrology of the river and the floodplain and where the river channel is, etc. No one's advocating that we remove the dam. No one. The whole idea behind the feasibility study is to understand what are our options. And one of the things that DEI will do is they'll cost it out as well. Eaton Rapids paid $7 million to remove their dam. Okay. Not a top-fill dam like ours, but it did. We don't know what the answer is. That's why we're going through the process, so we can have the conversations and get the facts from experts and then continue to engage the community. It's a community decision. So that's kind of where we're at. Where the city weighed in is blew me away. I had no idea that the city had a concern about the dam. The dam is classified by the dam safety people at Eagle as a significant risk. Not a hazardous risk, which is the highest risk, but a significant risk. They say that if the dam were to go, it would cause significant flooding downstream, property damage, etc. The city's issue is this, is that every 2 years the dam is inspected. And that inspection looks at the safety of the dam and is it deteriorating or not? What do you have to do to maintain its dam standards? The liability for the dam is significant. Over 20 years, the city believes it could cost as much as $1 million to continue to maintain the dam as it stands right now. The issue is this: there's no revenue stream for it. In other words, it comes out of tax dollars that we pay in, and there's no grants or no funding from the state that is saying, here, please use this for your dam safety issues. It's not there. So that's their concern. And they're not advocating that the dam be removed either. They just want to know what are the possibilities. And so I would entertain any questions you have. I wish Dave was here. We've got others involved in a vocational situation and time for them to just work through stuff. Any questions?
That's all right. I won't take it personally. Anyway, so next up, I invited a student I work with on the dam risk reduction and community engagement element to come up and just talk for a few minutes about. There's many times going. Anyway. To talk a few minutes about some conversations he's had with local realtors, which I think actually gets to some extent to this property value question. But I will say that this is something that we are thinking about. How can we systematically look at this to think about, is there actually a depression of the property value versus what it would be without that? And that's something we're working on. This is sort of a preliminary piece. So, I'll invite Gage Mitchell up.
So, as you just heard, my name is Gage. I'm a graduating student at Alma College. I'm a political science and history major, so I'm kind of interested in how things sort of run in our county. Over the summer, I began some research, which does not remain finished, but I have some preliminary results that I can share with you that kind of leads into why I think that we should be talking to realtors, landlords, and business owners who could be interested in running riverfront business about property in Alma and Gresham County as a whole. So this data is for Alma and St. Louis, which I know this is going to hurt our Alma pride a little bit, but St. Louis kind of fluffed those numbers up a little bit. Alma is doing worse than they are property-wise. Riverfront property value, so like homes that are on the river in Alma and St. Louis from 2015 to 2025, saw an 89% increase in value. That sounds like a lot until you compare it with non-riverfront property in Alma and St. Louis, which increased 124% in the same time. If we continue for another 10 to 20 years at that rate of growth, property that is not on the river will be worth more than property that is in Alma and St. Louis. Over the course of that 10 years, there was a $10,000 to $20,000 difference in property values, which is not very much, and that difference is shrinking over time because of the increase in value of property that's not on the river. So we started in 2015, there was about a $20,000 benefit for riverfront property over non-riverfront property. By 2025, that had decreased to under $10,000 in difference. Obviously, you would expect property that is on the riverfront to be worth more. That's just general knowledge, that's how things normally work. So it's kind of surprising that our riverfront property in Alma and St. Louis really just isn't worth that much comparatively. And this is within city limits. This is not like the county and the river as a whole. So now I'm working with Healthy Pine River to take that information and talk to those realtors, landlords, business owners about the river. I want to understand their concerns and what they believe needs to happen to bring financial success to our county, property-wise, business-wise. I previously interviewed Malcolm Frisbee, who used to do realty work in Alma, but he ended up leaving Alma because it just was not profitable anymore. He said that property in Alma was seeing poor sales and that young people were unwilling to buy property along the river because they wanted to use it recreationally. They would come in the summer, they would see all the algae build up, they would smell the water, and they would refuse to buy property. Micah Kemmler he's a local Alma realtor and landlord. He has shared similar thoughts that people are just maybe not interested in the river, that our values in Alma are not worth what they could be. So my plan is to interview as many realtors as possible, as many landlords as possible, as many business owners who may be interested in the city's riverfront development plan for businesses as possible, and figure out what they believe is what needs to be done. I think getting this holistic account of what all of these figures in our community believe needs to happen is going to help us to further develop our plan for the dam, for the river in general. These are the people that obviously are going to know the most about this kind of issue because they're the ones that deal with it every day. I'm in particular interested in the landlords that run the properties south of the dam that regularly flood. And that flooding provides health and financial issues for those landlords and the tenants that live there. So their thoughts on the dam, on the river as a whole, are really, really important.
That's kind of all I have for you. I'm going to come back in the future, most likely, with a much more formal bit of information for you, but that's the rundown of how things are right now.
I have a question for you. So, in my neighborhood, almost houses never, ever change hands above the dam. So I think the depression in property values is relatively downstream. It's a total different story upstream, I believe. I mean, like I said, my neighbor's house sold for a number I couldn't even believe. And then John Boss, who owns the Blue Shamrock, he lives in the sanctuary, and that's not Alma. His neighbor's house is sold for $850,000 on the river that's got a similar setting. So I think above the dam and below the dam are two different stories. So that's all I'm saying is the realtors don't even have enough data to make an assessment of valuation, other than you look at the recent comp of my neighbors and you just say property values are increasing very significantly.
We do have these properties that are worth a lot. If you're looking at a home that in 2015 was worth $650,000, an 89% increase in value is going to look much bigger than a home that's worth $100,000 and sees a 100% increase.
But I do think almost capped as far as relative income levels of people that live here. So, you know, there's a handful of people who pay $50,000 per house.
We are about $10,000 below the state average for individual income per capita, so that is true.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you're not going to apples to apples. I don't think it's serious. But that's just my opinion. I'm just saying, if property values are really going down, I guess we should all go into the city.
Well, they're going up. That's not the issue.
I
They're just not
guarantee
going up
they'll say
as
no.
much as they.
I'd like to add some context. I think the question would be, though, do you think those houses would be worth more if it were the lake it was before versus the waterfront that you had?
And as I said, you mentioned below the dam,
Oh, sure.
riverfront property in St. Louis has increased more than riverfront property in Alma.
Crystal Lake was 2,000 acre lake instead of seven. My house would be worth way
But
more.
that's what we're saying. The dam is causing the sediment to build up, which is eliminating the lake, which is driving home prices down. The value of that home would be more if the dam were, if the sediment were gone. And that's our concern. And the dam, you don't think that the lake, you just said the lake would add value to the home. I'm saying if the sediment builds up behind the dam, and as it sits now, your home is not worth what it would be worth, that sediment was gone and the dam went place.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm not just going to dispute that, but I mean, nobody's going to be swimming in it right now. So, with the farm on,
When I was a kid, there was a kayak.
And that's the thing.
Shakers
That-
putting in all this more cattle, and we're going to swim in the river. I don't think so.
I mean, if you don't think that
That's a
all of
separate
that stuff
issue, yeah.
increases the home values, then I think you're crazy. People not wanting to swim in the water.
That's
It's
right.
part of the
Yeah,
city.
let me add to that. I live on Piney Court, and I'm probably 200, 300 feet from the theater. So I'm gonna have a swamp, one way or the other.
If you don't do it.
No, if you do something, all that water is not, the channel's on the other side.
You're assuming that what we're doing is removing the dam.
Yes.
Yeah, that's not what we're trying to do. Okay, that's what I'm trying to.
We're kind of talking about changing the river, you know, get rid of, the mill pond might be gone. The water in the mill pond.
The mill pond's going away if you don't do it.
So today it goes, or earlier it goes away, or it just naturally goes away? And then what happens?
Yeah, that's
How
what
do you get
we're trying to
any
restore it to what it
flexibility?
used to be, hopefully, and keep the values low.
The ideal, I would thought, is if you put some, please.
If you take the sediment out, look at that.
Yeah, the ideal is basically a full restoration.
And we pull that off, and that might be the most logical way to do it.
Yeah.
The difficulty is that if we take the base case of doing nothing, it changes either way, right? And that seems to be the answer we're getting. Which again, we don't have the answers yet. This is preliminary, right? You know, options being explored, that kind of stuff. But either way, a change will occur. Changing something at the dam might actually be the smallest change to people's actual experiences in the long run. Again, we're still studying it, right? And people that make more money and are smarter than me are actually studying it. I should say we. GDI engineer is.
And the other consideration, the city weighs in on this as well, because the 2004 master plan had all that that acreage where Alma, Iron Meadow, going back to the old grocery store, that whole frontage piece was supposed to be redone into residential and commercial properties. They can't sell that property now simply because of the condition of the home with no home. So again, it's a residential issue, but it's also a community business issue as well.
I think one of the things is that we need to figure out some of the magnitudes here, right? I think that there's convincing preliminary evidence that it has an impact on property value, but do we know that? I don't think we quite do yet, right? That's preliminary. And it's always difficult to prove, like, how things would have been, right? That being said, when I look at the things, it does seem like it has an impressive effect. Which isn't to say that the houses aren't beautiful there and that they aren't, going to go for very high sums and that those sums aren't going to continue to go up. But as somebody who just recently bought a house not on the river in Alma, let me tell you, Alma is no longer a cheap real estate market. It has really changed. All right. Well, so I really appreciate, though, that people have different perspectives on this. And that is exactly what we wrote into this entire grant process, is that we didn't really want this to be a process that was solely or primarily based on a sort of pure sort of discussion of engineering, right? We really want to understand where people are coming from and what they're thinking about. And that actually leads me to my next thing. We are doing an initial community survey. If you look in your packet and you flip to the back side, I have a QR code here with a link, I believe, that is also put into the minutes if you want to type that in as well. We want to hear what people are thinking, basically. This isn't the most systematic study. It's mostly going to be something that is distributed through email, word of mouth, that kind of stuff. I'll honestly think of it as almost like a community brainstorm, just to kind of get a sense of what people are thinking about, where they're at. We will do a much larger survey that will be more systematic towards the end of this process. That being said, it's really important for people to respond to this because it will give us something that we can directly be talking with GDI, talking with the city about, and figuring out what are the kinds of concerns that by the end of this process we need to have answers to, right? And making sure that whatever options are proposed, that they fundamentally are something that the community wants, right? So that's there. I would really encourage people to take a look at it. The other thing was in our last meeting, I did a kind of a little bit of a silly thing with giant sticky notes and people writing down their thoughts. From that, if you look at the packet, all of that is available in a written form. It shows all the groups there. But since that's a lot of material, I kind of reduced this down to what I saw as the 6 major questions that people have. You can find that here. We don't need to read this whole thing, but basically people are concerned about the environmental impact of any change, and of course also the environmental impact of doing nothing. They're concerned about the financial and community impacts, and they're also concerned about the process through which things will happen. So those are kind of the 3 major concern areas, and as the study goes forward, I think that we need to be really attentive to them and make sure that we are actually trying to answer those questions. But in addition to this, and perhaps more important for understanding the situation on the river, Michelle LaRose at GDI Engineering, who unfortunately could not be here today, went through and responded to a breakout of the questions from that community engagement session that we did where we discussed these things. And has some pretty good answers, I think, to people's concerns. Just to highlight a couple of things, I'll let you read this on your own and find it here. One of the things I thought was interesting is that she talks about that there are many different options, such as partially removing the dam, installing a rock ramp or rock arch, rapids at a reduced height, which would make some changes, but would be more limited. Of course, also they are considering a full removal. She has several comments on how this will impact water quality. And one of the more encouraging things was that she notes that in general they believe that a change to the dam would improve water quality and the overall health of the Pine River, which is important for neighbors in St. Louis, right? But this isn't necessarily something that is going to have a negative impact downstream. I want to get a few more details on that, but that's encouraging news. Encourage you to just take a look at this over time yourself, and we will have quite a bit more, hopefully by the next meeting, if not the one after that, that will give more detail to some of these answers. I kind of just ran through a bunch of stuff there. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Is it Tesla? I'm sorry. Doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah, question for you. So as far as the quality of the water in the river, obviously we've got the same number of cattle ingresses on it. And every field ingress county style. And so right there, this is right to the river, right to the Great Lakes, which is great for the state of Michigan has large body of freshwater. So the question is beyond the dam, is the contamination is somehow getting to the Great Lakes, isn't it? Yeah. So, that's a bigger issue than this dam, just because, let's face it, the farm lobby is the strongest lobby in the country, and the farmers do whatever they want to do, and I know they're good about talking about the environmental stewards. No, at the end of the day, if Dow Chemical executives polluted the river to the extent the farmers did, they'd all be serving time in federal prison right now. And that's not a joke, that's the truth. But the farmers, and I don't understand the whole deal because they dump milk on a routine basis. They're overproducing milk and don't even get paid. And where does it finally come in that there's no end game here, because at the end of the day they're going to continue to pollute in their ecological terrorists to a certain extent. Obviously, they provide a food source, and how do you lose your job as a politician? The food costs are too high. So I get that, okay? But at the end of the day, where's the middle ground? Somebody's going to step in and say, look, this is like insane. We don't need, you guys would know better than I do. What's the equivalent human population of 40 million people would create the amount of waste that they're basically, right? When do you say enough's enough? And I'm not anti-farmer at all, so. But
there's a good article in the Herald this week about how much
Okay.
I was affiliated with research that was looking into that over the summer when I was doing my separate research on property values. And some of the things that can be done is, for one, when water is flowing faster, a lot of those nutrient pollutants is what we call them that get put into the water by a cow poop, by the milk. When the water is flowing faster, they are spread out over a wider area, and they're able to dissipate faster without any negative effects of things like building up that large amount of algae. You can also do things like in the feeder creeks, all the creeks in the county that the tiles drain into, and then they drain into the Pine River. You can increase the amount of plant matter in those, things like cattails. They help filter a lot of that out before it gets into the river, and then when you work with the dam to try to keep our water level the same, to keep the water flowing in a more natural state, you're both reducing the amount of pollutants that are entering the river, and you are reducing the amount of pollutants that stay suspended in the water when they get slowed down by the dam.
I read an article one time that ExxonMobil is probably
mean, there have been many attempts, right? The problem is always scale, in my experience. But I think this does get at the thing. I mean, obviously, the sedimentation of the dam is not the only issue, right? There are significant water quality issues that go outside of that. And this is sort of a parallel line, I think, that is being looked at. One of the things that I'm hoping is that we will really have some good answers about, how the water quality would change. So it's a complicated topic, right? If the dam were removed, if it were reduced, if it were something, whatever the option is that's chosen. And then we'll really know what makes sense. Right? It does seem like Michelle LaRosa's suggestion is that in general, increases to the water flow would have a net positive impact on water quality in the Pine River. Does that mean that it's going to have a net positive impact once it reaches the Great Lake? I'm not sure, actually. I'm not so sure
In
about that.
my house, and I live on the river, the water from the drains from that whole area go into the river. They flow into the river. That's what every junky piece of thing that comes down is going into that river.
Yeah. I mean, and this will remain an issue, right? This gets at sort of the core of why we had to have this dam risk reduction study done, right? Because this is really complicated. This is well outside of my full understanding, right? There are a lot of moving pieces, a lot of different things to optimize. And that's why the community survey is so important, honestly, and the community engagement piece is so important, because ultimately, whatever recommendations are made need to flow out of the community will as much as they flow out of what we find.
What is the purpose of it? What's it do?
Good question.
It's non-functional.
Yeah.
Non-functional? It's the whole of the water.
It's classified as non-functioning. Initially, it was built for sawmill.
Yeah.
Then it burned, and then it was rebuilt in '38. I think probably to create a lake backwater, and it also was a water resource for the city. Not only up until about 4 years ago, the city stopped taking about 25% of their fresh water out of it was treated, but it's coming out of the river.
Right. That's what St. Louis had the water.
That's actually a part of the feasibility analysis, is the city wanted to be able to maintain that as their overflow to pull water if something would happen to a well. And so the river, what they're looking at is keeping the banks, the city doesn't want to lose that access, and if you change the channel enough, and they're where they could pull from no longer exists, and they lose out on that, and they're kind of grandfathered into still being able to use that, so drastic changes to the shoreline would affect that as well. So the city's, that's a part of the analysis of the dam and what is created behind it as far as the water levels goes. The city has an area where they want to continue to pull in an emergency, and so they have to factor that in.
I was wondering if the dam has some sluice gates, you can control the water.
I'm sorry.
If the dam has some sluice gates, you can control the water.
Right.
There are controls with the dam that I think deal with the top level in moving the gates, but they've not moved them. There was a recommendation a while back that they drop the dam a little bit so that more water would flow over, which would also move the sediment. That was a recommendation by a former drain commissioner, and it never took hold. The city did not comply.
I would be curious what the reasoning for that is. I think my sense, and other people know better than I do, but my sense is that there are probably real limitations in how much can be done simply because there's a flow over dam. It's just not designed to pass much water over it, basically. Any other questions that people have?
One of the answers gates at the bottom of the dam, you leave it open, they don't move the sediment.
Correct, but then, if you're St. Louis, and that's part of the issue with removing anything, is what happens with the sediment. Does St. Louis inherit it? Back when Garnett talked about the study they just did the sediment depth, when Bar did their sediment depth in 2016, the cost to move that 420,000 cubic yards was $23 million. Now, the good news is that when we met with the gentleman from Stantec in Ann Arbor, he said if it's not heavily contaminated, you don't have to transport it. You might be able to move it and I would give an example. If you walk over by Conservation Park, there's that kind of that bend, that shallowed area that is not part of the river channel. His comment was, because I was advocating for an island, let's dredge it, create an island, cap the island, and we'll keep the no pine again. His comment was, the river will fight the island, and I understand that. He said, take the dredge and move it over towards Conservation Park and fill that area in, and then do something with the landscape, make it something that's productive over time. And as Garnett reported, if the dredge isn't heavily contaminated, that certainly creates some new options.
And that is the thing. It is actually encouraging news that we have today, honestly. That there really are some possibilities today that weren't possibilities yesterday.
Kind of add to that, if it were contaminated in the same volume of sediment, it'd be more expensive than less the contamination levels we found in the additional sediment. If you got my first thought on it, right? That adding the contamination to it creates so many more levels. You got to transport it, you got to handle it, you got to find landfills. So just the idea of it increases it exponentially. So that does help with it. And like we're talking about, if the dam comes out, you have to find some way to deal with the sediment to begin with. So if we start with the sediment's got to go somewhere, that adds a whole lot of context to what can we do to keep the banks the way that they are. Maybe adjust the dam while moving sediment and things like that. That's kind of, at least in my opinion, that's where it's probably going to start. How can we manage the sediment the cheapest way? And then from there, if you're already talking about it, that leaves the door open much more to some form of a dam removing in place and the banks and these things. It also helps that the residential side is there. There's less residential on the other side where you hopefully don't have the folks who own that other side, the municipalities, they get more land, right? They still have waterfront. They're less argumentative about it. If there were two rows of houses on each side of that, then you've got a whole different argument. There's a lot of positives that go with the situation.
It feels actually quite good. Honestly, I'm very encouraged by that. Well, just to give people a quick kind of roadmap of where we are in this process, and we probably won't just talk about the dam risk reduction stuff at every meeting. It's just we needed two here to kind of get things going. But on that process, the survey is out. I will be distributing that in various ways. We'll get some results from that. We'll hear about what people have to say through that. From there, I'm also going to be doing a series of focus groups with people, again, basically to get some feedback. And what this is all feeding to will be a sort of large-scale community meeting where GEI will come in and present options, and then we'll do some kind of a community deliberation process to see what we think about it. Finally, at the end of all of this, there'll be a large-scale survey to get a sense of, basically where people are at after they've heard everything, and after we really have solid information. So that's the plan. Yes?
What is the timeline for that study?
Good question. We have 2 years to complete it. There is a hope that most of it will be finished up by December-ish. I think that's the general.
Actually, we'll see. I think we're going to see the stuff from GEI in late spring or early summer. And I think that's good because then when we know what are the viable options based on their work and what they think as experts, then it really helps our conversation. I think sooner than later.
And will that be available?
Oh gosh, it'll be public. The entire process is
I will be going out of my mind to let people know about it, to be honest. So if you see me on the streets and just ask me for it, I'll probably have it on me during that time. But yes, no, we want this to be really well known, because then that is going to contribute directly to that final community meeting. In that community meeting and survey, we want people to have fully informed opinions, right? And then from there, some kinds of recommendations can be made. Of course, that's not the end of the road. Whatever people think makes good sense, we're still going to need to find funding for it. We're still going to have to convince regulators. We're going to have to do a lot of steps after that. But the thing that'll be cool is we'll know where we're pushing. And that's a really cool thing. So, yeah. Any other questions? All right. We did have a couple more elements here, but we are coming a little bit onto it. So, Chuck, do you want to just quickly?
Oh, I think, keep sending, if you've not sent your membership dues in, please do so. We're only 2 weeks into the process. We've had a terrific response. If you need an application, let me know. And we are working with our business and organizations, family, and foundations right now also. And that's going well as well. The whole idea behind this is to be able to fund the summer water testing, the grant writing, the research, the septic work that we're doing in the rural communities. And we have a big one coming up this summer in the Forest Hills area. And so they all cost money, unfortunately. But we appreciate getting from good. Thank you.
For good cause. See.
Randy, what was you were quoting from an area early? Can you tell me what your resource was? Was it a letter?
What's that?
Your early comments, I thought you were talking about something you had read.
Oh, your newsletter.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
I think the November one.
Okay, gotcha, thank you.
Anything else? Yes.
If you used to take it negative and turn it into a positive.
This is my whole philosophy of life, right? No, I actually do think, I actually feel good. I think that what we now know about the sediment, well, it is accruing at a very high rate, and that is concerning. The fact that it is something that we can work with, or rather that it's something that engineers can work with, is huge. That is hugely positive news. And that is going to put us exactly like Arnett was saying, that much closer to there being options that will really preserve shorelines.
How many streets run right into the river?
That's a really good question. I don't know.
Like down in my area there, if you take, like where the church is, and you go down this highway, all those drains come down and go right into the river.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
So you got a lot of land there and a lot of houses, and you're dumping everything there into the river.
Yeah, those flows, yeah.
Mostly surface water.
Surface water.
Not sewer.
Not sewage. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think this is part of the thing, right? Is also part of the thing that needs to be discussed is the impact on drainage and how that. Anything else? Would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion.
Second? Discussion? Are all in favor? Say aye.
Boy, we like you. We're keeping you 8 o'clock.
Hey, I had to teach classes. I don't run over.